Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The man across from Commander Elric Dorne had no name, no identification, no reflection in the two-way mirror behind him. His pale eyes catalogued every micro-expression on Dorne's weathered face with the patience of something that had been watching humanity for far longer than any single lifetime. 6 hours, Commander, the entity said, its voice carrying harmonics that made Dorne's fillings ache. Your crew believes you're in routine debriefing. Your wife Sarah thinks you're still in medical quarantine. Your daughter Emma is practicing piano, wondering when Daddy will come home from space. Dorne's coffee cup trembled against the metal table. He hadn't told anyone about Emma's piano lessons. That information wasn't in any file. How do you know about my daughter? The thing wearing a government suit smiled, revealing teeth that were slightly too white, slightly too sharp. We know everything about everyone who finds what they shouldn't find, Commander. Your grandfather found something in the Pacific during the war. Your father found something in the Nevada desert in 1962. And now you've continued the family tradition. Ice flooded Dorne's veins. His grandfather had died in a military hospital, raving about lights under the ocean. His father had been institutionalized after claiming the government was hiding alien technology in underground Bunels. Dorne had always assumed they were mentally ill. Tell me about the box, the entity continued, and suddenly Dorne was no longer in the debriefing room but standing once again on the desolate surface of the Leibniz Plateau. The lunar landscape stretched endlessly before them. A monochrome wasteland of ancient scars under a star-filled void that had never known weather, never felt wind, never heard a human voice until Apollo came calling. Commander Elric Dorne checked his oxygen reserves while watching flight engineer Hollis Veer and mission specialist Reuben Quaid collect samples near their landing module. 6 days on the surface, and what should have felt routine now carried an undercurrent of wrongness that Dorne couldn't identify. The silence pressed against his helmet like a physical presence, and even distant Earth seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable, hanging in that endless black. Control, we're 30 minutes out from sample site Charlie. Dorne radioed to mission control in Houston. The 4-second delay between transmission and response always made conversations feel like speaking to the dead, appropriate given what he would soon discover. Copy, Apollo 25. All systems remain nominal for tomorrow's departure window. Dorne acknowledged and continued his geological survey, but his attention kept drifting towards a shadowed depression near the crater's eastern rim. The formation appeared natural enough, just another impact scar in a landscape hammered by 4 billion years of cosmic bombardment. Yet something about it pulled at him with inexplicable urgency. Then his communication system began picking up interference. It started as a whisper beneath the static, barely perceptible above the constant hiss of radio noise. But as Dorne moved closer to the anomalous formation, the sound resolved into something that made the hair on his arm stand upright despite the spacesuit's climate control. Not mechanical interference or solar wind disturbance. Something rhythmic, almost musical, like a tuning fork vibrating directly against the inside of his skull. Control, are you monitoring any unusual electromagnetic activity on my frequency? The response delay seemed to stretch longer than the usual 4 seconds. Negative, Commander. All channels are clear. Are you experiencing equipment malfunctions? But the humming continued, growing stronger and more complex with each step toward the crater's edge. Dorne paused at the rim, his training warring with an inexplicable compulsion that seemed to emanate from the depression below. The smart thing would be to call his teammates, document the anomaly, follow established protocols for unusual discoveries. Instead, he found himself descending into the crater. Via, Quaid, investigating geological formation, 50 meters northeast of your position. Rendezvous in 20 minutes. Copy that, Commander, Via's voice crackled back through the static. The lunar dust at the crater's bottom had settled in perfect concentric circles, as if something had landed with tremendous force and then sunk slowly into the regolith over countless millennia. The pattern was too precise to be natural, too deliberate to be coincidental, and at the centre, half buried beneath layers of ancient dust that had never known atmosphere or erosion, lay something that violated every law of physics Dorne understood. It was roughly rectangular, approximately the size of a briefcase composed of material so black it seemed to absorb photons rather than reflect them. The surface showed no seams, no markings, no indication of origin or purpose. But when Dorne knelt and carefully brushed away the accumulated dust of eons, the object radiated warmth through his thick, insulated gloves. That was impossible. Nothing on the lunar surface retained heat for more than minutes after losing direct sunlight. The temperature differential between day and night could exceed 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and this depression had been in shadow for hours. The humming in his headset intensified, resolving into something that almost sounded like voices. Distant, fragmented, speaking in languages that predated human civilization by geological ages. Dorne's extensive training screamed at him to stop, to call his crewmates, to document everything according to NASA protocols for anomalous discoveries. Instead, he found himself excavating the object with desperate urgency, as if his life depended on removing it from its ancient resting place before something terrible happened. The weight was wrong, far too light for its apparent mass, as if the interior were filled with something less dense than vacuum itself. As he secured the mysterious object in his personal sample container, sealing it away from prying eyes and official documentation, the alien humming faded, but didn't disappear entirely. It lingered at the edge of perception like a half-remembered nightmare, a frequency that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his bones. "Commander, you ready to head back?" Via's approach snapped Dorne out of his trance-like state. He looked up to find both crewmates standing at the crater's rim, their bulky spacesuits making them appear like mechanical scarecrows against the stark landscape. His helmet chronometer showed that nearly 20 minutes had passed, though the excavation felt like it had taken seconds. "Just finishing up," Dorne replied, shouldering his pack with its impossible cargo. The mysterious object pressed against his back through multiple layers of insulation, somehow still radiating that inexplicable warmth. "Found some interesting mineral deposits. Nothing that can't wait for analysis back home." The lie came with startling ease, though he couldn't explain why deception felt not just necessary, but inevitable. These were men he'd trained with for 2 years. Men he'd trust with his life in any crisis. Yet something about the object, its unnatural warmth, the alien voices it seemed to generate, the perfect geometric pattern of dust surrounding its burial site demanded absolute secrecy. The journey back to their lunar module proceeded with routine conversation about sample collection procedures and tomorrow's departure timeline. But beneath Dorne's professional demeanour, a growing sense of unease took root like a malignant tumour. Every few minutes he could swear he heard that otherworldly humming threading through his suit's life support systems, as if the object were trying to communicate across barriers of technology and comprehension. That night, as Via and Quaid slept in the module's cramped quarters, Dorne lay awake staring through the small porthole at the star-filled void beyond. Earth hung in the distance like a blue oasis in an ocean of black, but for the first time in his distinguished career, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a destination he might never reach again. The return flight to Earth followed NASA's precisely calculated trajectory, the same flight path perfected over years of lunar missions. But Dorne found himself increasingly isolated from his crewmates, consumed by thoughts of the mysterious artifacts secured in the sample bay below. During mandated rest periods, he would drift toward the storage compartment, placing his hand against the bulkhead, as if trying to sense what lay beyond the layers of insulation and metal. The alien humming followed him across the void between worlds, threading through his dreams with promises of revelations that no human mind should be forced to comprehend. Upon splashdown in the Pacific, Dorne made the first truly conscious decision he'd made since finding the object. Instead of following standard protocol and delivering all samples to Johnson Space Center for immediate analysis, he requested special permission to personally escort his geological specimens to a secondary facility for specialized testing. The request was unusual but not unprecedented. Certain lunar samples required immediate analysis under specific controlled conditions, and mission commanders occasionally supervised the handling of particularly sensitive or valuable materials. NASA approved his request with minimal bureaucratic resistance, trusting in Dorne's decades of unblemished service and professional competence. What they didn't know was that Dorne had already made contact with Station Morospar. Station Morospar existed in the grey spaces between official government acknowledgement and plausible deniability. On paper, it was listed as a routine telecommunications relay station, one of dozens scattered across Alaska's wilderness to maintain communication with northern observation posts. In reality, the facility served a far more disturbing purpose: the analysis and containment of phenomena that didn't fit into conventional scientific categories, objects and events that posed threats to the comfortable illusion of an orderly, comprehensible universe. Dr. Thalis Wenro had been working alone at Morospar for 4 months when Dorne arrived by helicopter with his impossible cargo. A former MIT professor specializing in electromagnetic anomalies and quantum field fluctuations, she'd been recruited after publishing several papers on unexplained signal propagation in deep space, papers that had immediately been classified and removed from public access. Her security clearance exceeded that of most cabinet members, and her psychological profile indicated an almost superhuman capacity for maintaining operational secrecy even under extreme stress. She was exactly the kind of brilliant, isolated specialist that facilities like Morospar required. Dr. Wenro was a compact woman in her early 50s with prematurely grey hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalogue and analyse every detail of her surroundings with scientific precision. When Dorne placed his sealed sample container on her laboratory table, she circled it with the cautious movements of someone who had learned to treat the unknown with healthy paranoia. "So this is what's been generating electromagnetic interference patterns visible from orbit," she said, adjusting the thick-rimmed glasses that perpetually threatened to slide down her nose. "Every scanning device we've attempted shows nothing but static noise. X-ray crystallography, ultrasonic imaging, magnetic resonance. It's almost like the material itself is designed to actively resist analysis." The object sat motionless in the center of the sterile laboratory, its surface so perfectly black it seemed to create a void in the brightly illuminated room. Wenro had spent the past 3 days attempting various non-invasive examination techniques, all yielding the same frustrating result: incomprehensible interference that overwhelmed even her most sophisticated equipment. "But there's definitely something complex inside," she continued, making detailed notes in a leather-bound journal. "The electromagnetic signature suggests an intricate internal structure, possibly organic in nature. The interference patterns aren't random. There are mathematical progressions, harmonic sequences, recursive algorithms. It's definitely artificial, and it's definitely trying to communicate something." Dorne stood with his arms crossed, studying the object that had consumed his thoughts and invaded his dreams for weeks. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, testament to sleepless nights filled with visions of walking across alien landscapes and the skies that held though familiar constellations. "What about opening it?" he asked, though even voicing the question felt dangerous somehow. "No visible seams or mechanisms, no response to standard activation protocols," Wenro replied, consulting her notes, "but I've been monitoring it continuously since your arrival, and there are definitely patterns in the electromagnetic interference it generates. The frequency modulations follow mathematical sequences that suggest intentional encoding. It's trying to tell us something, but in a language we don't understand." That afternoon, while Wenro conducted routine calibration on the facility's satellite communication array, she positioned a tonal oscillation device, normally used for enhancing the reception of deep space radio astronomy signals, within 10 feet of the mysterious object. The reaction was immediate, unmistakable, and absolutely terrifying. The object's surface began to ripple like liquid mercury, undulating in waves that seemed to follow no known laws of physics. With a sound that resembled a long, slow breath being released from lungs that had held it for centuries, the lid folded open, inward with organic fluidity. The mechanism was more like a living thing, unfurling, than any mechanical device activating. Inside, coiled like a dormant predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike, lay a reel of film unlike anything in human experience. The material appeared almost biological in nature, with a texture that suggested preserved organic tissue, skin that had been dried and treated through processes unknown to terrestrial science. It pulsed faintly with its own inner bioluminescence, and when Wenro attempted to examine it more closely with a focused beam of light, the film recoiled from the illumination like something that had evolved in eternal darkness. "Jesus Christ," Wenro whispered, her scientific composure cracking for the first time since Dorne's arrival. "This isn't manufactured technology. This is something that grew." "We have to see what's on it," Dorne said, though his voice betrayed mounting apprehension. "The molecular composition is completely unknown to terrestrial chemistry," Wenro replied, carefully photographing the organic reel from multiple angles. "Carbon-based certainly, but the molecular structure doesn't match anything in our databases. It's almost like fossilized neural tissue, but from what kind of organism, I couldn't even begin to speculate." The facility's screening room had been hastily converted from an old military communications center, complete with a modified film projector capable of handling various formats and media types. As evening settled over the Alaskan wilderness, painting the snow-covered landscape in deepening shades of purple and gold, Dorne and Wenro prepared to view the contents of humanity's most inexplicable discovery. The organic film threaded through the projector's mechanisms with unsettling ease, as if it remembered this purpose despite its impossible age and alien origin. When the lights dimmed and the reel began to turn, the clicking sound it made was oddly wet and organic, like joints popping or cartilage settling, rather than mechanical components operating. The image that flickered to life on the screening room's white wall was grainy and unstable, showing what appeared to be a lunar landscape, filmed through primitive equipment. But within the first few seconds of footage, both viewers realized this was not any moon documented in NASA's extensive photographic surveys of Earth's satellite. The craters were arranged in complex spiral patterns that violated everything known about random impact distribution from cosmic bombardment. They formed geometric shapes and mathematical progressions that suggested intelligent design rather than 4 billion years of chaotic meteorite strikes. The horizon curved at angles that seemed to bend the fundamental nature of space itself, and the sky above was filled with stars arranged in configurations that belonged to no earthly view of the cosmos. The camera was obviously handheld, shaking with each laboured step of whoever was recording the footage. Static crackled through the aging speakers before gradually resolving into fragments of a human voice speaking English with the precise, clipped professionalism of military training. "Mission log day. I've lost count of the days. We've completely lost all contact with Earth base. The stellar navigation charts don't match anything we're seeing in the night sky, and our instruments are providing readings that shouldn't be physically possible according to any known laws of physics. The voice belonged to a man, definitely American, by his accent, but there was an edge of barely controlled panic lurking beneath the professional calm. Dorne leaned forward in his chair, straining to make out additional details in the murky, deteriorating footage. Johnson thinks we might have been thrown off our planned trajectory by some kind of massive gravitational anomaly. During the landing sequence, Rodriguez believes the geological formations here don't match any of our pre-mission survey data, but I've been studying the night sky from this location for weeks now, and I'm starting to think we might be somewhere else entirely, somewhere that was never meant to be reached by human beings. The camera panned shakily to show a figure in a bulky space suit that looked primitive and outdated compared to modern Apollo equipment. The helmet was larger and more cumbersome, with a faceplate that reflected something moving in the distance, something impossibly tall and geometrically wrong that swayed like underwater kelp in a current that didn't exist. The ground changes configuration when the Earth sets below the horizon, the voice continued, now clearly fighting to maintain some semblance of professional composure while his sanity crumbled at the edges. Sections of the surface open up into chasms that shouldn't exist, and we can hear things moving around underneath, not trying to escape from below, but trying to pull us down to join them. Rodriguez went down into one of those chasms yesterday to investigate the source of some electromagnetic readings. We haven't seen him since then. The film quality began deteriorating rapidly, colours bleeding and mixing into each other while the image became increasingly unstable. Visual artifacts that looked disturbingly like living organisms crawled across the frame, and the unknown astronaut's breathing became rapid and laboured, echoing through the facility's screening room like the death rattles of someone drowning in their own fear. I've been studying the Earth from our current position, and something is fundamentally wrong with what I'm observing. The continental configurations aren't positioned where they should be, according to our geological surveys. There are massive ice sheets covering regions that should be tropical, according to our climatological data, and I can see cities lighting up at night in areas that should be completely uninhabited wilderness. How long have we been gone from our proper reality? How long have we been walking around on this place that was never meant to exist? Through the growing static and increasing visual distortion, Dorne could make out the figure pointing directly at the camera with a gloved hand, then gesturing towards something massive and threatening in the distance. The image showed a towering silhouette that seemed to warp and bend the landscape around it, creating optical illusions and perspective distortions that made both viewers' eyes water and their stomachs churn with inexplicable nausea. "If anyone ever finds this recording," the voice gasped, now barely audible above the growing electromagnetic interference, "for the love of God, don't come looking for us. Don't try to find this place. This isn't our moon. This isn't anyone's moon. We were never supposed to land here. Never supposed to discover this place exists. The thing in the distance, that massive presence, it's been waiting here for longer than human civilization has existed, waiting for someone to light up the sky with rocket exhaust and radio signals and show it the way back to populated worlds." The camera began shaking violently, as if the person operating it was running in panic or falling down a steep incline. Brief flashes of imagery showed the alien landscape racing past at impossible angles, punctuated by glimpses of that towering presence growing larger and more geometrically disturbing. In the final frames, just before the image dissolved completely into white noise, something that might once have been wearing a human spacesuit turned towards the camera, something that had eyes like collapsing black holes and a mouth that opened onto infinite darkness, containing things that had never been born and never intended to die. The film ran out with a sharp, final click, and the screening room fell into the kind of absolute silence that exists only in places where something terrible has just been witnessed. Both Dorne and Wenro sat motionless for several long minutes, their minds struggling to process the implications of what they had just experienced. Dr. Wenro was the first to move, lurching abruptly from her chair and rushing from the room with her hand pressed firmly against her mouth. Dorne could hear her violent retching in the hallway outside, followed immediately by the sound of her quarters door slamming shut with desperate finality. She didn't emerge from her self-imposed isolation for 3 full days. When the facility's security team finally performed a mandatory welfare check, they found Wenro unconscious on her floor, her fingernails torn and bloody from clawing at the walls of her room, until physical exhaustion overcame her compulsive behavior. She had covered every available surface with intricate markings and scratch patterns that seemed to writhe and shift when observed directly. Symbols and configurations, unlike any known writing system or mathematical notation, yet somehow conveying meaning despite their utterly alien origin. But here's what the security team didn't report in their official documentation. The markings weren't random. They were star charts, astronomical coordinates describing the exact position of celestial bodies as they would appear from Earth precisely 40,000 years ago, during humanity's last major genetic bottleneck, when global population dropped to fewer than 10,000 individuals, struggling to survive an ice age that nearly drove the species to extinction. Wenro was immediately airlifted to a private psychiatric facility in Anchorage, where she remained in a completely catatonic state for nearly 4 weeks. When she finally began speaking again, her first coherent words were a warning, delivered in a voice that sounded like she had aged decades during her breakdown. Don't let them see you watching the film. They know now. They know exactly where we are, and they're coming back. Meanwhile, Dorne found himself completely unable to escape the footage's devastating implications. He requisitioned access to the facility's extensive astronomical databases and began obsessively cross-referencing the star positions visible in the mysterious film with every stellar survey and navigation chart in human records. The work consumed him entirely, driving him to spend 18-hour days hunched over calculations and computations, surviving on nothing but black coffee and the desperate need to understand what he had witnessed. What he discovered shattered his understanding of human history and our species' place in the cosmos. The stellar arrangement shown in the impossible film corresponded exactly to Earth's night sky as it would have appeared approximately 40,000 years ago, during the planet's last major axial precession cycle, but that should have been absolutely impossible according to every known timeline of human technological development. Spaceflight capability was barely 2 decades old, and the primitive spacesuit technology, clearly visible in the footage, predated even the most experimental rocket programs by several decades. Yet the evidence was undeniable and mathematically precise. Somehow, impossibly, the film showed human astronauts from an earlier epoch of development, an era when Homo sapiens was still struggling to master fire and basic tool construction, when they huddled in caves that would eventually become archaeological sites studied by civilizations that wouldn't exist for 40 millennia. Sleep became not just elusive, but genuinely dangerous for Dorne. When physical exhaustion finally forced him into unconsciousness, he found himself experiencing vivid, lucid dreams of walking across landscapes that perfectly matched those shown in the Alien film. The dreams were detailed and consistent, filled with the claustrophobic weight of an unfamiliar spacesuit and the oppressive silence of a world that had never known atmosphere or weather. In these nocturnal visions, he could see Earth hanging in a sky filled with the wrong stars, but it wasn't the Earth he knew and loved. Massive ice sheets covered continents that should have been green with vegetation, while ancient cities glowed with inexplicable light in regions that should have been pristine wilderness. The planet itself seemed somehow younger and less scarred by human civilization, but marked by something far older and infinitely more terrible. He would wake each morning with actual lunar dust embedded under his fingernails and throughout his hair, despite never having left the hermetically sealed environment of Station Morospar. When he brought this physical impossibility to the attention of the facility's medical officer, the man attributed it to severe stress-induced hallucinations and prescribed increasingly powerful sedatives that did absolutely nothing to stop the dreams or explain the tangible evidence of his nocturnal journeys. Strange incidents began plaguing the facility with increasing frequency and escalating severity. Electronic equipment would malfunction in ways that violated basic principles of engineering, displaying readings that contradicted fundamental laws of physics. Temperature sensors in completely sealed rooms would register absolute zero for hours at a time, then suddenly show heat levels sufficient to instantly melt steel before returning to normal readings as if nothing unusual had occurred. Atmospheric pressure gauges would indicate perfect vacuum conditions in areas that should have been pressurized, then snap back to standard readings without any detectable cause or mechanism. Computer systems would spontaneously activate and begin calculating trajectories to stellar coordinates that didn't correspond to any known celestial bodies in our galaxy. Most disturbing of all were the unauthorized activations of the facility's audio recording equipment. Multiple times each night, sensitive microphones throughout Morospar would begin capturing detailed conversations taking place in rooms that were demonstrably empty. Sophisticated voice analysis software identified the speakers as using vocal patterns, speech rhythms, and linguistic structures identical to the unknown astronaut from the mysterious film, but the conversations themselves were fragments of mission logs describing expeditions that had never been officially recorded in any government database. Surface exploration operations, Day 12. The shadows here are getting progressively longer, even though the sun hasn't moved position in the sky since we arrived. Mission Control Base is still not responding to any of our transmission attempts. I think they might not be able to hear us from this particular location. The architectural structures visible in the distance are definitely of artificial construction. They light up with their own illumination during the night cycles, and I can observe things moving between them in organized patterns. God help us all, I think we're not the first human beings to land in this place. When Dr. Wenrow finally returned to Station Morospar after 6 weeks of intensive psychiatric treatment and pharmaceutical intervention, she bore little physical or psychological resemblance to the confident, analytically minded scientist who had departed. Her hair had turned completely white despite her relative youth, and she moved with the careful, deliberate precision of someone who no longer trusted their own senses or the basic stability of reality itself. She found Dorne in the screening room during one of his increasingly frequent sleepless vigils, staring at the blank wall where the impossible footage had played weeks earlier. The organic film sat in its protective canister nearby, occasionally pulsing with that faint inner bioluminescence that suggested it was somehow still alive and aware of its surroundings. "I've been thinking extensively about what we witnessed," she said, settling into the chair beside him. Her voice was different now, carrying strange undertones and harmonic frequencies that suggested she had acquired knowledge that no human being should possess. It's not a recording of something that happened in our past. It's happening right now, in real time, somewhere else. Every time we watched that film, we were looking through a window into another place, another reality, and whatever exists in that place could see us looking back at them. She produced a thick notebook filled with astronomical calculations and star charts, the pages covered with handwriting that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of observation and the lighting conditions in the room. I worked extensively with the psychiatric staff, trying to make rational sense of what I experienced during my psychological breakdown. The markings I compulsively made on my walls weren't random scratches made by a disturbed mind. They were precise coordinates, stellar position calculations that correspond exactly to what the film shows. Dorne studied the complex charts and diagrams, his extensive training in celestial navigation making the calculations comprehensible, despite their deeply disturbing implications. These positional coordinates would place Earth during the last major ice age roughly 40,000 years ago, but that's completely impossible according to our understanding of human technological development. That's exactly what I thought initially, Wenro replied, her fingers tracing incredibly complex orbital mechanics diagrams that seemed to writhe under her touch. But then, I started conducting research into classified archaeological reports, military documents that officially don't exist, government studies that are buried so deep they're not even acknowledged. Did you know that every few decades someone discovers evidence of advanced technological artifacts buried in ice core samples and sediment layers that predate known human civilization by tens of thousands of years? She turned several pages, revealing high-resolution photographs of metallic fragments and crystalline structures that appeared to be manufactured rather than naturally occurring, objects that had been found in geological strata from epochs when human beings were supposedly living in caves and hunting with sharpened sticks, advanced metallurgical alloys that shouldn't be possible, with primitive technological capabilities, electronic components and circuit boards discovered in rock formations from before humans developed written language, precision-engineered tools found in archaeological contexts that are literally impossible according to our accepted timeline of species development. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that human technological development hasn't been the linear progression we've always assumed, Wenro continued, her eyes reflecting knowledge that seemed far too vast and terrible for any single person to contain. Every time our species reaches a certain critical level of technological advancement, every time we develop the capability to leave our planet and begin exploring space, something calls us to that other lunar surface. And once we answer that call, once we make contact with whatever has been waiting there since before continents settled into their current positions, our entire civilization collapses back into primitive conditions. The cycle begins again from the very beginning. Cold fingers of existential dread crawled up Dorne's spine like living things. How many times has this happened? Based on the geological evidence I've been able to access, dozens of complete cycles, maybe hundreds. Each iteration of human development eventually achieves spaceflight capability, makes contact with whatever ancient intelligence exists on that other lunar surface, and then disappears entirely from the historical record. The few survivors revert to Stone Age living conditions and spend tens of thousands of years slowly rebuilding civilization from scratch, never knowing they're following a pattern that stretches back to the very dawn of the human species. That night, Station Morospar experienced the most significant paranormal incident since the mysterious film's initial discovery. Dorne was awakened by the facility's emergency lighting system, bathing his quarters in pulsing waves of red illumination. The main electrical grid had completely failed according to all diagnostic systems, but somehow the screening room remained fully illuminated, powered by energy sources that didn't appear on any electrical diagrams or infrastructure blueprints. He could hear the familiar wet, clicking sound of organic film passing through mechanical projector systems. But when he reached the screening room, he discovered something that challenged his fundamental understanding of physical reality. The alien film was running in reverse chronological order, displaying the impossible lunar landscape from camera angles and perspectives that hadn't appeared in their original viewing sessions. As Dorne watched in horrified fascination, the camera perspective began shifting and rotating with deliberate intelligence, as if controlled by some form of consciousness existing on the other side of the screen. The unknown astronaut's voice crackled through the speakers with perfect clarity, but now the words were completely different, more immediate, and personally directed. "Commander Elric Dorne," the voice said, speaking directly to him across impossible distances of space and time. "You found our message. You watched our final transmission. You understand the truth now about what's waiting out here. There's no possibility of going back from this knowledge." The facility's main outer airlock began cycling through its opening sequence without any authorization codes or manual activation from personnel. Emergency alarms blared throughout the entire Morospar complex as Arctic wind howled through the corridors, carrying with it a fine, glittering dust that sparkled in the emergency lighting like powdered starlight. The particles were unnaturally warm to human touch and left faintly glowing residue on every surface they contacted. Dawn ran through the facility's twisting maze of corridors towards the main laboratory where the black box still sat open on its metal examination table. But when he arrived, the interior no longer showed empty space or darkness. Instead, it displayed a perfect, real-time view of that alien lunar surface, complete with the massive towering presence in the distance and multiple figures in spacesuits from different historical time periods. All of the figures were walking in exactly the same direction, moving with mechanical precision towards something that waited just beyond the visible horizon. As Dawn stared in absolute terror into the impossible window between worlds, his own reflection appeared among the procession of doomed astronauts, wearing the same primitive spacesuit technology as the explorer from the original film. The reflection turned toward him with deliberate slowness and spoke with his own voice, his own inflection, his own speech patterns. "Welcome home, Commander. We've been waiting such a very long time for you to join us in this place." Dawn reached for an emergency fire axe mounted on the laboratory wall, absolutely determined to destroy the object that had brought such devastating horror into his existence. But as the blade descended towards the black surface in a killing arc, his own reflection reached upward and caught his wrist with impossible strength. The touch was like grasping a piece of liquid nitrogen, cold beyond any human experience, and he felt himself being pulled inexorably downward into the surface of the box as if it were not solid matter, but a pool of liquid darkness deeper than any ocean. The sterile walls of Station Morospar began dissolving around him like melting ice, replaced by the familiar star-filled void of space. But these were fundamentally wrong stars, arranged in configurations and patterns that belonged to Earth's ancient past, when ice-covered continents and primitive human beings huddled around fires in caves that would become archaeological curiosities 40,000 years in the future. Below his feet, an alien lunar surface stretched to impossible horizons, its terrain marked by architectural structures that predated human civilization by geological epochs. In the distance, the towering presence waited with infinite patience, exactly as it had waited for all the others who had answered its call throughout humanity's cyclical rise and fall across countless millennia. Commander Elric Dorne took his first steps across that nightmare landscape, joining the endless procession of explorers from every era of human development, all walking forever toward a destination that promised answers to questions the human mind was never meant to formulate, let alone attempt to answer. The debriefing room felt increasingly insubstantial now, existing in the fragile boundary between sleeping and waking, between reality and something far worse. The nameless entity wearing a government official's appearance closed its folder and slid documents across the table with movements that were slightly too fluid, slightly too precise to be entirely human. "Sign this report, Commander," it said, and now Dawn could see that its reflection in the two-way mirror showed something else entirely, something tall and geometrically impossible that had been watching humanity since before the continent settled into their current positions. "State that your lunar mission discovered nothing unusual or anomalous during surface operations. The object and all associated materials will be classified at the highest possible levels and stored in a containment facility where they can do no further damage to civilian populations. Dorne's hand appeared increasingly translucent as he reached for the pen, slowly fading from this reality as he became more connected to that other place. What happened to Dr. Wenrow? Dr. Wenrow suffered a complete and irreversible psychological breakdown due to prolonged exposure to classified materials and isolation-induced stress. She's receiving appropriate care at a private medical facility where she'll remain comfortable and secure for whatever remains of her natural lifespan. Dorne signed the document with a signature that looked completely different from his own handwriting, as if written by a hand that was no longer entirely connected to this world or this timeline. The ink seemed to glow with its own inner light for several seconds before settling into normal, black text. "One final administrative matter, Commander," the entity continued as it collected the papers and sealed them in an envelope marked with security classifications that didn't officially exist in any government database. "You'll be immediately transferred to a consulting position with NASA's Historical Archives Division. Very quiet work, excellent pension benefits, absolutely no more active space missions of any kind. I trust you understand the reasoning behind this career reassignment." 3 years later, a radio telescope facility in Chile's remote Atacama Desert intercepted a brief but powerful transmission on a frequency that had been officially abandoned since the conclusion of the Apollo program. The signal was weak and heavily distorted by interplanetary interference, but sophisticated filtering equipment managed to extract a clear message that was repeated exactly 17 times. "We should have never lit the sky." The transmission was immediately classified as equipment malfunction caused by solar flare activity, and all records were sealed under national security provisions that carried life imprisonment penalties for unauthorized disclosure. But not before a junior technician named Carlos Mendez made a personal copy of the recording, which eventually found its way through a network of conspiracy theorists and amateur radio enthusiasts to a small cabin nestled deep in the wilderness of rural Montana. Commander Elric Dorne had built his retirement home in a valley so remote that GPS satellites occasionally lost signal, where delivery trucks required detailed topographical maps just to locate the property. The cabin was modest but comfortable, with large windows that provided unobstructed views of the night sky, and a basement workshop where Dorne had constructed the most sophisticated private radio, astronomy, set up outside of government facilities. Every evening, as darkness settled over the Montana landscape like a familiar blanket, he would descend to his workshop and methodically tune his equipment to frequencies that officially didn't exist in any civilian database. He listened with infinite patience for voices calling across impossible distances, messages from explorers who had ventured too far from home, and discovered truths that humanity wasn't psychologically prepared to comprehend. On his cluttered desk sat a small fragment of organic film, the only piece he had managed to preserve from that night at Station Morospar, when reality had torn open and shown him visions of humanity's cyclical fate. The fragment pulsed with its own inner bioluminescence, brightest during the dark hours before dawn, when the veil between worlds grew thin enough for things to slip through. The walls of his workshop were covered with astronomical charts and complex calculations, mapping the slow drift of celestial bodies across geological time periods. Every equation, every trajectory analysis, every orbital mechanics computation pointed toward the same inevitable conclusion. Somewhere in the vast cosmos, reflected in every moon that had ever formed, around every planet capable of supporting intelligent life, was a destination where all explorers eventually found themselves. It was a cosmic trap disguised as the ultimate discovery, written into the very fabric of space and time itself. Every species that developed the technology to leave their homeworld would eventually receive the same invitation, find identical artifacts buried in their planetary surfaces, view the same impossible recordings of their predecessors who had answered the call and never returned to tell the tale. but Dorne had begun to understand something that the entity at Morospar hadn't wanted him to realize. The cycle wasn't random. It wasn't even natural. Something was orchestrating humanity's rise and fall, cultivating technological civilizations like a farmer tending crops, harvesting them at precisely the right moment when they achieved spaceflight capability. His research had led him to classified archaeological reports from around the world. The Denisovan cave sites in Siberia contained metallic fragments that predated known metallurgy by 50,000 years. Aboriginal Dreamtime stories described sky people who came in silverbirds during the last ice age. Inuit legends spoke of visitors from the land of always night, who took the bravest hunters on journeys they never returned from. Every ancient civilization had the same stories, the same warnings, the same desperate attempts to warn future generations about the things that waited in the darkness between worlds. On what would be his final night in the cabin, as winter snow fell like cosmic dust outside his windows, Dorne's radio equipment crackled to life with unprecedented clarity. Multiple frequencies activated simultaneously, creating a complex harmonic pattern that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and resonate directly in his bones. The voice that emerged from the speakers was his own, but speaking words he had never said in a place he had never been, describing things he had never seen with his own eyes. This is Commander Elric Dorne of Apollo 25, transmitting from lunar coordinates that don't appear on any terrestrial navigation charts. If anyone receives this message, please understand that we are not lost. We are exactly where we have always been meant to be. The cycle continues as it always has, as it always must, as it was designed to continue. A pause filled with the sound of footsteps on alien soil, accompanied by the mechanical breathing of life support systems that had never been manufactured on Earth. The entity that spoke to me during debriefing wasn't human. None of them are human. They're the caretakers, the shepherds, who guide each iteration of our species towards the same inevitable conclusion. They've been watching us since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be out there. Another pause, longer this time, filled with sounds that might have been wind if they weren't coming from a place that had no atmosphere. My grandfather found something in the Pacific during World War II. My father found something in the Nevada desert in 1962, and I found something on the moon that was placed there specifically for me to find. We're not the first generation of Dornes to serve this purpose. We won't be the last. The transmission quality improved dramatically, as if the signal was originating from just outside the cabin rather than across impossible distances of space and time. They choose bloodlines, families that carry specific genetic markers that make them susceptible to the call. The Dornes, the Aldridges, the Shepherds, the Glens, all of us astronauts, all of us explorers, all of us carrying genetic codes that were modified thousands of years ago to ensure we would answer when the time came. Dorne's hands shook as he reached for his coat. Outside, the snow was falling upward, defying gravity in patterns that formed recognizable stellar configurations from Earth's ancient past. "Time to come home, Commander," his own voice said through the radio speakers. "Time to join the others who came before and prepare the way for those who will come after. The cycle must continue. The harvest must be completed." Dorne walked out into the Montana wilderness, his footprints in the impossible snow leading toward the tree line, but disappearing after a few hundred yards, as if he had simply dissolved into the falling darkness that was no longer falling, but rising towards stars that were no longer in their proper positions. The cabin stood empty for exactly 40 days before local authorities performed a routine welfare check. They found everything in perfect order except for the basement workshop, where radio equipment continued broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist, sending messages to coordinates in deep space that corresponded to no known celestial bodies in our galaxy. The broadcasts continued for precisely 40 days and nights before falling silent forever. When technicians from an undisclosed government agency finally arrived to remove the equipment, they discovered that Dorne's astronomical calculations had been updated with new information, written in handwriting that perfectly matched his own, but described star positions that wouldn't be visible from Earth for another 40,000 years. In the margins of his notebooks, a final message appeared in the same familiar script. The next cycle begins soon. Watch for the signs. Listen for the frequencies. When you find what you're meant to find, remember, some discoveries are not accidents. Some discoveries discover you first. The equipment was carefully crated and shipped to a classified storage facility deep beneath the Nevada desert, where it joined thousands of other artifacts from humanity's long history of reaching too far into the darkness between the stars. The official report listed Commander Elric Dorne as missing and presumed dead due to exposure in harsh winter weather conditions. But on certain clear nights, when atmospheric conditions aligned in precisely the right configurations, radio operators across the world occasionally pick up fragments of transmissions on abandoned military frequencies. The voices speak in dozens of languages from every era of human development, all describing the same impossible landscape under stars that never move, all walking toward the same towering presence that has waited since before Earth's continents settled into their current geological positions. And sometimes, just before dawn, when the signals begin to fade back into static, listeners report hearing familiar voices offering the same invitation that has echoed across millennia in dozens of extinct languages. Come and see what we found. Come and join us in the place where all journeys end and all mysteries are finally revealed. Come and help us prepare for the next harvest. 20 years after Dorne's disappearance, a new generation of astronauts began reporting strange dreams about walking on alien landscapes. Mission specialists started finding unusual objects during routine training exercises. Radio telescopes detected signals from deep space that matched no known stellar phenomena. The cycle was beginning again, as it always did, as it always would. Dr. Sarah Chen, a brilliant young astrophysicist at JPL, discovered the first artifact buried beneath the Mojave Desert during a routine geological survey. It was a small black cube that hummed with the same frequency as human brainwaves, warm to the touch despite being buried in cold sand for unknown millennia. She smuggled it back to her laboratory, just as dozens of others had done before her, just as dozens of others would do after her. The pattern was as inevitable as orbital mechanics, as predictable as stellar formation, as inescapable as gravity itself. When Dr. Chen opened the cube 3 months later, using equipment that activated only when she stood within 10 feet of the object, she found another reel of organic film. This one showed different astronauts, different time periods, different iterations of the same eternal story. But in the final frames, she saw something that chilled her to the bone. Commander Elric Dorne, still wearing his primitive spacesuit, standing among hundreds of other figures from every era of human development. All of them were facing the camera, all of them were smiling, and all of them were beckoning for her to join them. The film ended with a message written in perfect English across the alien landscape. "Welcome to the next harvest, Dr. Chen. We've been waiting for you." Somewhere in the darkness between worlds, in a place that existed outside of time and space as humans understood them, the ancient intelligence that had been cultivating sapient species for millions of years prepared for another collection. Earth's human population had reached the optimal point, technologically advanced enough to be useful, numerous enough to provide adequate specimens, but not yet advanced enough to pose a threat to the cosmic order. The signs were appearing right on schedule, unusual artifacts surfacing in archaeological digs, radio signals from deep space, dreams of alien landscapes spreading through the population like a virus. Soon the first manned mission to the coordinates provided by the artifacts would launch, just as it had launched dozens of times before throughout human history. And when the astronauts landed on that other moon, that place that existed in the margins of reality, where mathematics became fluid and physics bent to older laws, they would discover the truth that no human mind was designed to comprehend. They weren't explorers or pioneers or brave adventurers pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. They were the harvest. The frequency continues to broadcast across the cosmos, patient and eternal, waiting for the next civilization to develop radio technology and wonder what might be hiding in the spaces between stars. Waiting for the next species to look up at their night sky and feel the irresistible urge to reach out and touch the infinite darkness that reaches back. And somewhere in that darkness, Commander Elric Dorne walks eternal patrol across landscapes that never change under stars that never move, helping to prepare for the next group of explorers who will answer the call, join the procession, and learn too late that the greatest discoveries are often the ones that discover you first. The cycle turns, as it always has, as it always will, until the last curious mind in the universe looks up at the night sky and wonders what secrets might be hidden in the spaces between the stars. But by then, it will already be too late. The harvest will be complete and the universe will finally be quiet, empty of questions that should never be asked and answers that should never be found. In the end, the most terrifying truth is not what waits in the darkness between worlds. It's the realization that the darkness has been waiting for us all along.